Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Networking. Still networking. That's awesome. We love that. You know, I do a lot of speaking at conferences, and you know the conference is a success when you have to kind of work to get the audience's attention. Because, you know, there are a lot of conferences I go to, and everybody's kind of, they're sitting there waiting for you to start, and they're kind of, you know, their heads. But here it's great because it's like, hey, I'm up here. It's great. So it's awesome. I love that. That level of networking, that interaction is great. How's it going so far for everybody? Good? All right, good. All right, what I'm going to talk about today is the state of the MPS industry, right? Now, this is kind of a fun topic for me to talk about. I'm going to do a little retracing here. You know, when I started the company in 2006, I remember, well, we'd go out and we'd have two conversations when we first met with someone, right? The first conversation was, who the heck are you? And what's a photizo? Which, by the way, photizo is Greek for enlightened knowledge. Doesn't have anything to do with photos or photocopiers or any of that. It's Greek for enlightened knowledge. But the first discussion was, who the heck is photizo? You know, what's this about? And the second discussion was MPS. Click charge? What is that? What are you talking about with MPS? And so we really spent, you know, the first year, I used to say that we spent the first year, probably 3/4 of it, you know, just saying who we were and trying to define MPS. Even though companies have been doing it, they've been out there. The first MPS engagement I was involved in started in about 2000 in Europe. So it's been going on for a while. It's been happening. It's not necessarily new, but it wasn't very widely recognized. We had a video this morning, and you could argue maybe it's still not that widely recognized at the consumer level. It's not a Sony yet, right? To say MPS, people don't know what that is. But I think in terms of an industry, we have seen dramatic change. When we go out now, we never have to explain what MPS is. Now, we may have a debate about what does constitute MPS, what doesn't constitute MPS. We may have a debate about the definition, but the term itself in our industry, in the broader imaging industry, is pretty widely recognized. Not a lot of debate about it. And I think that's pretty exciting. That's pretty neat. We've kind of seen the birth of an industry here in a lot of ways. So as we talk about this today, I'm going to talk a little bit about where we've been, what some of the key markets, trends, and dynamics are, the MPS business model, the fourth stage of MPS, and what's this all mean to you? And what's it all mean to you whether the context you're coming from is a corporate decision maker, a channel partner, a reseller or dealer, a vendor, an OEM manufacturer, a software company, whatever role you play in the industry. We're going to try to address each one of those, okay? Now, and we'll try not to overwhelm you with numbers either. I know, you know, we're a research company, so we love to throw numbers up there, right? But we'll try not to get too crazy on that. But I do want to throw up one number first. In our first conference, one of the presentations threw up this number of 284,000. Now, if you remember, the context of the number was that the speaker had done a search on how many times managed print services showed up when you did a Google search. Is 284,000. Anybody have any ideas how many times it showed up? I did this exact same search term a week ago. Any guesses out there? 5 trillion. Well, not quite that much, but 4 million? Pretty good guess. 27 million searches on the term. 27 million. Now, if you realize that this is from March of 2009 to May of 2011. That's really a 2-year period, 2009, 2010 to 2011. That's a 100-fold increase in the search term. That's pretty big. That's pretty big. So one thing, when you look at any industry growing, one question is interest level. Well, that's one indicator that the interest level is going up, right? Pretty neat stuff. There are also some indications that this is now an industry. You know, one of the things when you're in industry that has to happen is you have to have the press watch you, the analysts watch you, all those types of things. It's interesting that today, we launched the first MPS advisory service back in 2008, 2007. Today, every major analyst firm that tracks the imaging space has an MPS service. A lot of competition for us. That's kind of good and bad, but it's good for the industry. It says there's a lot of focus on the term. On the training side, I can remember I did a print fleet roadshow back in 2008, I think it was. Went around talking to dealers, and there were maybe 3 firms that had some type of MPS training at the time. I did a count not too long ago. It's something like 30 now in the U.S. that are doing it. So a lot of training activities out there. A lot of marketing firms out there. So there's a lot of coverage. It's interesting because there's growing private equity and venture capital interest. There are several firms in this room, including ours, that are venture capital backed. We have done in the past, and still do at times, some work with Wall Street firms. It's interesting the number of inquiries you get from a Wall Street type of firm that says, well, how's this industry impacting a HP or a Lexmark or a Xerox or one of the major players? So increasingly, it's being seen as a factor in some of these established firms. So that's a big deal. So we're seeing a lot more interest there. We're seeing more interest at the channel level, doing roll-ups, things like that. Several firms out doing that. And then we're also seeing development of some standards, definitions, and best practices. Now, I'm not going to say we're anywhere where we need to be on that yet. And Joe Barganier is the president of the MPSA. Raise your hand, Joe. Joe's going to fix that. Okay, so he's going to get industry standards and no. But seriously, the MPSA, the Management Service Association, even CompTIA, several organizations are trying to work on that. And that's really important, is getting some standards around this. Coverage by the associations. CompTIA has a focus group around management services. BTA covers it. And, of course, we have the Management Service Association, which, by the way, if you join the MPSA and you join the board and work on the board, you get a nice shirt like the one Joe's wearing. So, again, encourage you to engage and be active in that. Now, who is the MPS industry? We talk about an industry. Who is it? Well, it's a lot of companies. And in fact, as we look at the companies attending this year, this is just listing the companies that are attending this year. You would have to say it's you. You are the MPS industry. And I think that's pretty exciting. You're part of a new, growing community industry. And that's pretty neat stuff. So you are the industry. When we talk about market dynamics, now I do have to show at least one chart of numbers, right? We're a research company. We got to do that. When we talk about market numbers, the first thing we always talk about is size. This is a graph of the total MPS revenue globally through 2014. That 2014 number is $68 billion. In 2010, this year, it's about a $26 billion market. That's huge. That's a significant market. That's a big change. That's big growth. Now, one of the things that's a challenge about this market is that's not necessarily new growth. In other words, that doesn't mean the imaging market has expanded by $26 billion. In fact, one of the things that's challenging is this is a conversion market in a lot of ways. It's customers moving from an old model, which was transactional based, buy a product, sell a product, manage a product, to moving to a services-led model. You'll hear me talk a lot. If you've ever heard me speak, you've probably heard me mention IBM as an example of this. IBM is probably one of the best examples of a conversion from a hardware, technology, transactional model to a services model. 1992, IBM had a $5 billion loss. It was the largest single loss in corporate history up to that date. And if you remember, the whole debate with Lou Gerstner and the board and Wall Street was how are you going to break the company up? How are you going to maximize value for the shareholders? And at the time, they had about 420,000 employees. Today, let's go to 2009. Worst economic climate that we've seen in, gosh, probably close to 100 years, right? Terrible economic climate. IBM had record profits, over $2 billion in profits. They had almost 70% of their business was services-led, services-based business, and highly profitable and growing. And it's interesting, they have 400,000 employees now. Now, what's interesting about that is, you say 400,000 employees, 400,000 employees. Well, that's a pretty painless transition, right? When you talk to IBM, it was not an easy transition. They went down to 220,000 employees. They ended up churning almost half the organization. And you ask them, you say, are you done? They'll say, nope, we're still changing. We're still evolving. We're still doing it. So this looks like great opportunity numbers, and it is. There's a big business out there, but I'll have to tell you this. My belief is you're not going to get that business by doing business the same way you've done it in the past. You're not going to win it by being a transactional company that has a service offering. It's going to be won by services companies. And the question is going to be who gets there fastest. Second thing that we're seeing that I think is really key. This is from our forecast and market size and share tracking. But one of the things that you see is the size of the Smb market. Now, I don't know if you guys remember, how many people were involved in MPS back in the early 2000s, like before 2005? Okay, you guys in the room, right? Now, how many of you went after a small, medium business for that opportunity? A few of you did. 90% of the engagements at that time are going after a global company, a major account. And why was that? Well, when it started off, there wasn't a print fleet out there. There wasn't a print audit out there. There wasn't, there weren't all these tools, all the financing companies, all the MWA Intels, all the companies that provide the support, the infrastructure, right? If you're going to go out there, you built it yourself. You made a big investment in people, in systems, in technology. And if you're going to do that, you had to go after a big account to make it worthwhile. It didn't cut it on an SMB account. So what we're seeing that's changed now, because this infrastructure is out there, because there's more capability being delivered to the market, it's becoming more cost effective. More resellers, channel partners are being enabled. And you're seeing it start to go down to small, medium businesses. Now, for example, we're under a managed print service contract. Our company is. We're a small company, less than 25 full-time employees. Now, by the way, we're also a global company because we have offices in Singapore. We have an office in London. Now, I don't think any of the vendors in the room are probably ready to take us on as a global contract yet. We're a little small for that. But the point is, we're a small, medium business, but our requirements are not all that different in many ways from a global company. I want consistency of service. I'd like one bill. I want a single contract. That's a real challenge. So it's going to open up some incredible opportunities. It's going to drive growth. This SMB mid-market opportunity is going to drive growth. But it's going to have to force you to think a little differently about how do you support that. Because just because it's SMB doesn't mean it's easy or it's small or it's not a complex engagement in some cases. The other thing that we're seeing is while the indirect, the channel-based business is growing, we do expect to see out into the near-term horizon, direct is still going to be a major portion of the business. So that's going to be just an ongoing dynamic. We expect to see it grow, and this obviously changes a lot depending upon whether you're talking about India or New York. Very different business models, dynamics, different levels of infrastructure and channel support, channel capability. But here's one of the key things. In this graph, you see there's 2010 and 2014. 2014's in the red. And if you looked at the mix of hardware and services, you would see in 2010, hardware and services is 85% of the revenue for the quote MPS market. But if you look out in 2014, all of a sudden, the services piece of it grows significantly. And that's the key. This is shifting to a services market, and how you're going to be measured is based on how well you deliver. Now, here's my chart to where I either make my clients really happy or make them real unhappy, and since we have clients in most of the industry, we make some people happy and some of our clients unhappy. No way around it. But what we're trying to do here is articulate a qualitative measure of where firms are at, okay? And this is talking about a global MPS focus. So this is saying for the vendors out there, and I know Joe said that's not a good term to use, and I think he's right. Let's call it potential partners out there. For the manufacturers out there, where are they at in terms of delivering a global managed print service capability? And if you look at it on the left-hand side, you have what we call MPS ability. Can you do it? Can you deliver across a fleet of 15,000 devices in 100 countries worldwide and be able to deliver a single bill and be able to manage it effectively and deliver a consistent level of service, etc.? That's a tall order. That's a huge order, quite frankly. But then on the bottom part is level of MPS commitment. How much are you investing? Do you have an MPS division? How much are you putting into ensuring that you're successful with this global kind of engagement? And what we've done is just take a stab at this. And I think the bottom line of this, and you could argue this, and I'm sure you will, and I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of arguments about this after the meeting, right? But the reality is there are a lot of companies that are doing great stuff. For example, Canon has some great implementations in North America. They're doing some good things in Europe. But, you know, is it a company that you would say they can deliver consistently a global implementation? I think even they would say we're probably going to be a little challenged on that. Not saying they can't, but it's going to be a challenge. There are a few companies that have built or are building a global infrastructure delivery capability. And my hat's off to them because that is a huge, huge challenge. That is not easy. So, now, so where are the vendors at? They're at different levels of commitment, different levels of programs. Some are doing better in some geographies than others. But then you have to kind of look at what an important piece of this, which is where's the software at? Because software is a real important part of this infrastructure, right? And when we talk about the software, there are kind of two types of software. On the left-hand side, you have user management software, what we'd call user management software. So, for example, something like Equitrack or Pharos or Papercut that is more geared around managing or monitoring or driving user behavior or cost bill back or those types of activities. On the right-hand side, you have device-centric software, okay? So things like PrintFleet or FM Audit that are very good at measuring devices, okay, and monitoring devices. Our argument is you're going to see these two worlds collide. You're not going to be a user management, rules-based company or a device management tools company. You're going to be a combined, integrated, converged solution that manages user behavior and devices all together for the client. So that's a very big shift. And I think what you're seeing is some alliances, some acquisitions, and you're going to see a lot more of that. Because that's really two pretty different competencies that are coming together there. The other thing you're going to see is expanding customer expectations. I'm going to talk about this based on two things. We do a lot of work with CIOs, IT leaders directly, to where we advise or counsel them. But we also do tracking studies around the world. We capture in Asia, Europe, and North America. We've been doing this for 3 years, over 1,500 interviews a year with MPS decision makers. And one of the things we measure is expectations and how well everyone has performed against expectations. And so when we talk about expectations, here's the challenge in my mind. And I know we've got some folks sitting here from corporate decision makers who are sitting here in the audience. So I'm going to kind of be looking at you, see if you nod your head up and down or if you shake your head, so I'll know if I'm in trouble or not, right? But this is a quote from a CIO that was doing a 10,000 plus fleet implementation, global implementation, and I thought it was a real insightful quote. He said, A, finding someone to manage the fleets is easy. Now, I think that was a little bit of a overstatement, maybe not easy, but doable. Let's put it that way. But then the second part was, they said, the tough part is finding help and improving our document workflow and business processes. The whole point was, it was about, how do I make my business run better? How do I make my business run better? Very, very key issue. Second thing we heard, and this is a great quote. Guy sat there, very successful MPS engagement. He'd optimized the fleet. Everything's running great. Had it fine-tuned, optimized. He said, okay, what's next? Where do I go now? And it's funny because what I hear a lot is many times the customers are a little frustrated because they're saying to the potential partners, to the vendors, guide me. Tell me where I can go. Give me some metrics. Tell me how much I can improve this. This is the other one that we hear, and we've heard it in many forums quite a bit, but another global client that said basically they've done a great job with their domestic operations. Can they go replicate this around the world? This customer had about 4,000 devices around the world that they needed managed. So again, can you do it consistently? Now, this is a spider diagram. I love spider diagrams. My staff hates them, but I love them. I think they're cool. But they kind of take a little bit of wrapping your head around if you haven't used them before. Basically what this is, if you go from the inside of the circle to the outside, that's just measuring a % of respondents, okay, that said they were extremely satisfied. And what you see is it stops at 40%. That in itself should tell you something, because it basically says less than half the respondents were extremely satisfied with any of these attributes. And this is just a sample of some of the 32 attributes that we measure as part of our studies. But what's interesting is this. One thing you should really take away from this, first of all, if you see the kind of lighter bluish lines, they're for North America and Asia Pacific. And customers are relatively more satisfied on all aspects than they are in Europe. I thought about that a lot. And I thought, now come on, our guys in Europe, they've been doing it a long time. They know how to do MPS. Is this really a reflection of the quality of MPS that's delivered in Europe? And I've done some follow-up interviews and discussions. And what I'm hearing is it's not. It's not that the quality of delivery is worse in Europe. The expectations are higher. In a lot of cases, they've already reached where their fleets have been optimized. They're well managed. They've reduced their cost, and they're sitting there saying, okay, take me to the next level. The bar has moved up. So for you guys that are already in Europe, sitting in the room, you're sitting there going, yeah, I probably see that. I understand that. Okay. For you guys in North America and Asia Pacific sitting in the room, that's where it's going. So be ready. It says that the expectations are going to increase. So what that says is your level of capabilities are going to have to increase. Okay, here's another one. This is one that tries to look at market maturity. And what we did is, if you look at the left-hand axis, that is the size of the market in 2014 in absolute dollars. And the bottom axis is the size of the market in 2010. So if you're over in the bottom left-hand quadrant, it says you're a little smaller market, and if you move up, you're growing. If you're over in the right-hand side, it says you're a larger market, and depending on whether you're higher or lower, you're growing faster or slower than the other. Real easily, or real succinctly, what this says is, today North America is the biggest market. Europe's growing faster, and it's going to be bigger, right? Asia's growing, and growing faster than Latin America. But the numbers inside the bubbles, those are market maturity metrics. We've actually went out and defined some metrics that say how mature is a market based on what's the level of hybrid dealer penetration, what's the level of third-party programs to support channel, what's the level of financing for MPS engagements, things like that. And what this says is, from a maturity level, North America is probably farthest ahead, Europe is farther behind, but Europe is farther behind primarily because of the channel. The channel in Europe is just now starting to embrace MPS. Whereas the channel in the U.S. has, I'm not saying they're all being successful with it, but they've embraced it. And in fact, everything, whatever show you go to, whatever publication you read, they're going to talk about MPS if it's a channel-related publication in North America. So this is just trying to give you a sense of how it's evolving. One of the things I hope you'll take away from both these is that this is a complex, dynamic market. And you can't treat every geography the same. They're different. They're fundamentally different. Now, this is one of my favorite charts. I love talking about our three-stage model. If you haven't ever seen our three-stage model, where the heck have you been for the last 5 years? Seriously, the model we have defines it this way. You start off with control. You have to understand where's your environment at. And by the way, that's not just understanding the hardware environment, it's understanding what are the user needs. Why do some users need to have a personal printer sitting on their desk? Why do some customers need to have scan-to-email capability? Why do some users need to have highly secure control panels and access to print? So it's really understanding the user needs, okay? Understanding the organization's objectives. Where is the client trying to get to? Is it cost reduction? It's usually what we throw out, right? But reality is, I've talked to many clients. One that's actually sitting in the room, I remember when I first did the interview with them, it'd be interesting to see if they remember this or not. This has been about 4 years ago. And I said, well, was your objective to reduce cost? And they said, no. At first we didn't know what our cost was. How could we try to reduce it? It was just, let's get our arms around it and understand it. And maybe it might have been even just to cap it and keep it from growing. So their understanding is the control piece. That's where you got to start. Secondly, you move into optimizing and outgoing management. Now, this is where you say, okay, the average fleet, if it's unmanaged, for every 2 people, there's an imaging device. The average out-of-pocket cost per employee is $750. That's not productivity, it's out-of-pocket cost. Per employee for imaging is $750, right? Now, if you go to an optimized environment, you see those numbers improve. You see it go up to a 6-to-1 employee-to-device ratio or an 8-to-1 employee-to-device ratio. You see an average of about $250 per employee annual savings. Some pretty big numbers, pretty cool stuff. So that's optimizing, and it's mostly focused around infrastructure, right? Devices, equipment, supplies management, service management. But then you also have ongoing management, because by the way, guess what? You get it optimized, it doesn't stay that way. It grows, these fleets grow, they evolve, your needs evolve, so it changes. And then the third stage is where it really starts to get interesting in my mind, and this is what we're starting to hear about more and more. This is where you start talking about enhancing document processes, enhancing document workflow, improving business productivity, taking a bank and automating their credit application into an electronic workflow and reducing processing time from 3 days to 1. That's where you're getting into business process improvement, right? That's pretty exciting stuff. Now, by the way, when I talk to most customers, what they say is companies are getting pretty good at stage 1 and 2. They're getting pretty good at managing infrastructure. Not many are very good at stage 3 yet. Only a few. And in fact, it's interesting because, when I first spoke at this conference 3 years ago, we talked about this hybrid reseller concept, guys that had made this transition to a services-led model. And one of the things we said is, if you're not a hybrid reseller, you'd better start working now at it hard, because the guys that are there in 3 years are going to have a huge advantage. But the other thing we said is, if you're a hybrid reseller, you better start pedaling even harder, because there's a whole lot of guys going to be chasing after you, and you better add something new to your arsenal. And that's really where this stage 3 comes in, is you've actually got to move the ball ahead of the game. You've got to get in front of it and actually be bringing these solutions in. Now, it's interesting, too, because I was just having a conversation just before I got up here to speak with the nationwide team. I hope I can mention that. Don't throw anything at me. But they were talking about, their next challenge is, okay, we've got the environment optimized, right? How do we start improving the processes? So they're already there. They're already starting to look at that. And I'll tell you, that's something I hear quite often. How do I start moving into that? Customers are moving there. The question is, are you ready? Can you get there? Just out of curiosity, of the end user decision makers in the room, how many of you are starting to look at some kind of document workflow, document management type of activity? Any hands? 1, 2, yeah, okay. There we go. All right, so we're seeing that's already happening, right? Now, that's all document stuff. Now let's put a different hat on. Here's what's interesting. When I go out and talk to IT guys, and they use a little different terminology, right? I'm going to use the same model, but they'll talk about the infrastructure layer, the application layer, and the process layer. When I talk to them and show this model and say, okay, if we're talking about IT outsourcing, IT business process improvement, do you go through the process of trying to get your desktop environment under control? Do you go through the process of trying to get your server environment under control? Do you go through the process of trying to optimize it? Use server virtualization or things such as that to make it more efficient, more effective? Do you have to worry about ongoing management of those devices? Mirroring, all these things that let you, have kind of failure tolerance, fault resistance? And do you start looking at business process outsourcing? They say, yeah, absolutely. So this is an IT-centric view of the world. Now here's what's happening. This is coming together. It's coming together. It was interesting. I met with the vendor, I can't say which one, recently in Europe. And I met with the vendor, and in that meeting, and this is a hardware manufacturer, there was a company from a services firm, a professional services firm. And their whole job is they were on a consulting engagement to teach that vendor how to do professional services engagements. This is the next phase. This is where the market's moving to. Customers are increasingly going to say, look, I don't care if you're an imaging company, I don't care if you're an IBM, I want you to solve my problem. Make me more efficient, make me more productive. When I talk to IT guys, and we've heard this before today, and everybody in the room knows it, but kind of the horrible thing we don't like to talk about, the white elephant in the room, is that IT doesn't care about print or copy. They don't. It's boring to them. Right? I mean, it hurts me. I spent years on the manufacturing side designing these great printer products that I thought were really cool, but it's kind of boring to them. The reality is, ITOs, CTOs, Chief Technology Officers, CIOs, are being pushed on performance, on improving their business, on bringing business process improvement to the stage. They are sitting there, their CEOs are going to them saying, look, I don't care, I don't want you to buy more technology, make the stuff we've got work. Make our business work better. Get us a 5% improvement in our efficiency. That's huge. That flows millions of dollars to the bottom line. That's a different focus. And let me tell you, when you go in and you talk about MPS, increasingly, as you go in and talk to the IT guy, that's what he's going to be asking you about. How's this going to help me make my business more efficient? Yeah, cost. Okay, we can do that. And then if, we can go out and bid it out, after a couple of years, if you do a good job at it. But the question is, can you help me make my business more efficient? If you can talk about that, you've got a seat at the table. If you don't, I'll probably push you off to my procurement guy and let him go work his magic on you. I mean, this sounds tough, guys. I know it sounds tough. But I think it's really important to recognize where the industry is. So you've really got this collision of managed print services and ITO and BPO. One of the things that's going to happen, whether you're a manufacturer, whether you're a reseller, is that you're going to see that your business model is changing. And in fact, traditional competitive advantages, things like product leadership, vertical industry dominance, channel dominance, that drive business models based upon technology investment, installed base share, channel shelf space, cost management. That's going to change, and what you're going to see is an environment to where you have competitive advantage driven by services leadership, channel loyalty, ecosystem dominance. Do you have the right partners? Do you have those partners locked in? Whether they be software, financing, service providers, account dominance. You know, it's not about owning part of the account, it's how many accounts do you own. Because when you own the account, you own it all. And by the way, that changes the business model. Because now the drivers of business model success are infrastructure investment, contract share, hearts and minds of the customers. We talked about loyalty this morning, about leadership, revenue optimization. How many of you guys are looking at your P&L, if you're a reseller, and saying, how do we optimize our revenues, our services revenue stream? Where are hidden services that we can actually monetize with the customer? And by the way, customers are willing to pay for services if you deliver the right ones. Right? You've got to deliver the right services, and they're willing to pay for it. So this is a very different model. And here's the key, and here's what I'm going to challenge you with. I always like to throw a challenge out here. You know, we like to consider ourselves thought leaders for the industry, so we have to throw some thoughts out there for that we'll get arrows in the back for later. But my proposition is this. You have to lead a business model transition. And in fact, the companies are going to be sitting here 10 years from now are going to be the companies that go through the same type of transformation that an IBM went through. That becomes services-led. And that says you're going to be measuring your business in different ways. You're going to use different metrics. You're going to use different criteria to measure what is success and what is not. And that's where it starts. And by the way, when you do this, the first thing you'll see, and this is where a lot of companies are today, they're at this kind of aspiration stage. I want to be there. That looks great. I know I need to offer that. But then there's a commitment stage. And this is the hard part, because when you commit, it says you got to put dollars behind it. And by the way, it can't be an MPS champion that's leading commitment. It's got to be the IT executive. It's got to be the CEO. It's got to be the CIO. It's got to be top management. That's a different type of environment than what we've had in the past. And by the way, once you have that commitment and you make that investment, you're not going to get it right. You're going to learn. It's a learning process. You're going to get it maybe 90% right, and you're going to learn, you're going to adjust, and you're going to measure, and you're going to get better. It takes time. So it's interesting, it's challenging, but I think it's also exciting. Now, when you talk about this, one of the things you have to look at is what lets you get there. And here's the other thing that we kind of, our soapbox that we get on a lot. And that is about what we call the total infrastructure. When somebody says, do you have an MPS infrastructure? And this absolutely is no knock against any of the companies that do some great stuff. But you know, if you just say, yeah, I've got a print fleet server, or I've got a print audit, or FM audit, or MWA Intel, or any of these pre-owned software, whatever, and you say, yeah, I've got software, that's not MPS infrastructure. It's a piece of it, an important piece, not to minimize it, but you've also got to have the people, you've got to have the knowledge, you've got to have the management metrics, and the partnerships. They're going to let you bring a whole solution to the table, because what that drives is how efficient you are from a cost, a scalability, and a performance objective. And let me put this in real simple terms. If I say to you, if I went out in the audience and I took a poll and I said, are you more efficient than your competition with your MPS program? I would argue that 99.9% of the audience couldn't tell me. You can say, yes, I think I am. Yeah, we feel we are, but can you show me a metric that says you're more efficient than your competitor? That you deliver a service with fewer people, or quicker, or faster. Because guess what? If your competitor is out there delivering engagements, let's say with an average of 5 people, and it's taking you an average of 10 people, who has the cost advantage? Who has a sustainable model? That's the key. And that's when I talk about management metrics, that's where the management metrics have to go. How do you measure the business? How do you tell if you're efficient or not? Because that's what's going to drive cost. Okay? Does that make sense? Can you guys, can you buy that? All right. So this total infrastructure to us is absolutely key. And we're going to have a test on this. Okay? No, we won't have a test on this. But my point is, and these are not all the metrics, but there are a ton of metrics. We've had Mike working on a project where we're actually developing these metrics and all these categories. He's got a spreadsheet that's about gazillion pages by gazillion pages, you know. Just a massive number of things you can measure. But the point is, at different stages, depending on what you're delivering to the clients, it takes different levels of ability and capability. So a very different set of challenges. Now, by the way, this should kind of be exciting to you because this is actually, hey, we get to build something new. We get to add capability. We get to bring more value to our customers. I can tell you, any business where you're bringing value to your customers is a heck of a lot more fun than to where you're fighting on price. Flat out. It's always more fun, and there's a lot of opportunity. So what's this mean for you? Well, first, from the customer perspective, and I start with the customer perspective because, quite frankly, that's the only one that matters. If we're not doing a good job of delivering for these customers what they need and what they're trying to accomplish, it doesn't matter because they're not going to be customers for long. So it starts with, is it more than just fleet management? I'm going to argue that, yeah, you might have a good business today doing fleet management, but that's not going to be enough to be competitive in the future. You've got to actually help the customer meet their objectives. And you had better start benchmarking where you're at versus your competitors. Because if you're not doing that, you don't know if you're ahead or behind the game. And that's tough to benchmark, but it's really important. Secondly, from a channel perspective, I would argue that for the channel, moving to this new business model is going to be table stakes. If you don't do it, you're not going to be competitive. You're not going to be able to deliver what the customer needs. And so really the question becomes, how do you get there? A lot of good programs out there, Supplies Network, United Stationers, a lot of these companies have great programs out there. So, you know, do you use a program? Do you go out and buy somebody that's already doing it, that's really good at it? Do you build it yourself? There are guys in the room that have built their own infrastructure to do this and have been very successful. So, you know, a lot of different routes, and I'm not going to say which one's right for you because it depends on your business. There is no single right answer. From the OEM vendor's perspective, OEM vendors, it's no longer about whether you can provide MPS or not. I never have a customer when I go out there and they say, can Canon do MPS? Can Ricoh do MPS? Can Lexmark do MPS? Can HP do MPS? They don't ask that. They assume you can do it at some level. Their question is, are they competitive? Can they do it as well as someone else? That's where it's at. And can they help me move the business forward? And then finally, there's a lot of what I call infrastructure providers in the room. Again, guys that provide services, supplies, financing, all these other programs that help make this work, particularly for the channel. I'm going to argue that standards, certifications are going to be a lot more important. It's going to be very much a way that we make sure that there's a way of measuring quality, that you're offering something that's appealing and meeting the needs of the customers. And then also, I think there's going to be a real interesting transition in the industry. Companies are going to play different roles. You know, it's a little bit like the utility industry. If you ever study the utility industry, there are guys that own dams and produce electricity. There are guys that own the infrastructure lines, the distribution networks. There are guys that broker the electricity between utilities. There's a very complex, kind of interesting infrastructure built up. But there are different roles. And the key is, what role are you going to play? And figuring out what role you're going to play and where you can add value in that chain is going to be the real key. All right, so I'm going to open it up for questions, but hopefully that's got you thinking a little bit. And again, guys, I got to tell you, this is an exciting industry. We are going through tremendous growth. We've got a lot of change. It is exciting stuff. I'm not going to tell you it's easy. This is a business model transition we're going through, and I will continue to beat that horn because I think it is fundamentally a different business. And that is a challenge. But you know what? The guys that are making the transition, they're having a lot of fun. They're having a lot of fun and a lot of success. So, with that, do I have any questions out there in the audience by any chance? We've got time for just a couple here. No questions? I answered everybody's questions. I did good. Oh, I've got one. Okay, please. Do we have any mics floating around? Oh, okay, just yell out and I'll... Well, the question is, so CIOs are bored. What's the right entry point? Well, first of all, whenever you go in with this, the first place you have to go into is the C-level. And it's actually more likely going to be CEO, CFO level. Because again, what I'm going to argue is what you want to be talking about is business productivity improvements, business workflow improvements, process improvements. That is going to be an executive level focus. Now, by the way, the CIO and eventually someone below the CIO level will implement, right? It's not the CEO or CFO that actually goes and implements. It's somebody in the IT organization. So real quickly, you've also got to be able to go into IT and talk in their terms. And by the way, guys, you got to learn how to talk to IT. You know, they don't care a lot about PDLs, you know, page description language. They care a lot about server virtualization. You know, I mean, you got to learn, you know, SLAs, you know, all those things. So, yep. Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be a transition. It's not going to happen overnight. I think it's over the next couple of years. We'll see that happen. We're already seeing some of the software companies with alliances. I mean, you know, you saw, it's kind of interesting. I thought FM Audit being acquired by ECI. You know, and that convergence, well, that was kind of an accounting, if you will, kind of system, acquiring a device management system. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some kind of user management piece come into that at some point. You've seen companies like Equitrack that have traditionally been seen as more cost recovery, although I know my Equitrack guys in the room, that's not the best way to describe it, but they've been perceived as more cost recovery. But the reality is they've built a lot of capabilities now, and they're actually getting into more of the device management space. So it's happening. It's going to happen in kind of waves. But it's still, I think it'll be a couple of years before you really see it kind of converge together. Some sooner than others. Good question. Good question. Yes, sir. Here's the thing, okay? This is like going on a diet. Anybody here go on a diet? By the way, if you saw me a year ago, you know I've been on a diet, so I really relate to this a lot, right? Thank you. The point is this. It's about changing kind of your behavior, who you are. It's real easy to talk about it. It's real hard to do it. And so I think there is, among all the OEMs, recognition, yeah, we got to go there. They're struggling with how do I get there? And how quick do I get there? And, you know, I think one of the things is they'll still, you know, it's truly never going to be a pure services model. If you go to IBM today, IBM sells and makes a lot of technology, a huge amount. But the difference is focus. They are services-led. You know, if you went into IBM in the early 90s, I remember I had an IBM salesman come in and call on us. I was with a research company at the time. And he was trying to sell us an AS400. We didn't need an AS400, but that was the IBM technology that was the closest to what we needed, so that's what he's going to sell. And he's going to try to convince us we needed an AS400. Today, that IBM Global Services rep will come in, talk to you about your business, probably already have a lot of data about your business, understand it very well, and talk to you about a consulting engagement, about some processes he can improve. And oh, by the way, about 6 months from now, when you're really in deep with them, they'll say, oh, and here's some technology. And when they bring the technology to the table, it may or may not be IBM. It's whoever's best to breed. That is a very different process. It doesn't say that they have to sell, if you're an imaging manufacturer, don't worry, I'm not telling you to shut down the factories. You don't have to do that. But it's a complete different focus. It's being led by services, and oh, by the way, you might still make technology, but you might walk in, okay, we'll see when this happens, but if you're HP or Xerox, you might walk in and say, really, for this set of solutions, I should bring my competitor in and offer their product. That doesn't happen today. They may support it if it's already there, but they're not going to bring them in and sell them, for the most part, right? So, I think it's a transition. It goes to services-led. I wouldn't tell them they have to shut down their factories, but it's going to change their business model a lot. Good question. I think I have time for maybe one more question. Oh, yeah. Yes. That is an excellent point. Just in case you didn't hear it, kind of the statement was that it's about phrasing it in the language of business. Okay, so going in and talking about asset utilization, not asset optimization, not device utilization. Let me put it another way. When you have that first meeting with the CFO, if you bring up cost per page or device utilization or any of that stuff, you're going to be out the door in about 30 seconds. Because the CFO is going to say, uh-oh, copier sales guy trying to sell me something. That's exactly what goes through their head. Now, if you talk to him and you say, okay, what are your business objectives? And he starts talking about, well, we've got to do more with the same number of people. We've got to improve our productivity. We've got to reduce our costs. You say, okay, well, if I can talk to you about ways we can do that, can I go work with your organization to do that? He's going to say, yeah, you come back with a solution. Great, I'm in. And you walk out of the meeting with that agreement, guess what? You can just go start working on the assessment, working with the IT organization. You've got the mandate from the CFO. That is a completely different discussion. I didn't even talk about cost per page or any of that other stuff. And I got to tell you guys, we're our own worst enemy. That's what we're used to talking in. That's an excellent point. Excellent point. So use their language. Yes, Hakeem. Yeah. So are you asking in the channel side of things specifically? So the question is whether we would see firms that are channel firms specifically that are in the U.S. trying to expand globally and do this kind of management, because it's not all people-based. There's a lot you can do from technology and remote monitoring and remote management. The short answer is yes, and we're already seeing some of that. In fact, it's interesting. Buchanan Technologies, anyone that was here last year, they were a keynote speaker for us. They're a big MSP, a managed service provider, but their target was to have 100,000 printing devices under contract by this time this year, and I think they're on target for it. They've just expanded about 6 months ago into Europe, started doing some work in Europe, so absolutely, you're going to see that happening, I think. So it'll get there. All right, well, let me, real quick, just a couple of houses. Thank you very much. Good, I appreciate the questions. Great questions. I'm around all day, the next couple of days, so don't hesitate to ask me. Thank you.